Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to 15 with Fosca, the podcast. I am so happy to be sitting down today with fellow U.S. expat in Tuscany, Lauren Mouat. She is a writer, a professional tour guide, one of the founding members of the Florence Literary Society, and she also has a phenomenal literary magazine, Open Doors, which we will be talking about during this podcast. Welcome, Lauren. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much, Fosca. I'm happy to be here.
It's such a pleasure. So I don't know your Italy story, and I always start my podcast when I'm talking, obviously, to people who live here like I do. What first drew you to Italy, and why did you decide to stay?
That's a question I ask myself regularly, yes. I first came to Italy a little bit, I came for my study abroad semester in college, like so many young students do, and that was my first time in Italy. I had kind of chosen a few months before based on my interest in art history, and I was interested in the Italian language, but I didn't know anything about it. And one semester in Rome was not enough. Mm-hmm. And I thought I would just come back for a year, post-graduation. And that year turned into 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and on. And now it's been over 15 years that I've lived in Italy.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And so you started out in Rome, mm-hmm. but now you live in Livorno. And I want to talk about that for a second, because first of all, I kind of don't want to say it on the podcast, but I'm going to say it anyway. Livorno is one of my favorite places in Tuscany. And it has such a particular personality. It's right on the beach. It's got a really interesting history. The people are really quite lovely. It's just kind of an amazing place. But it's not an obvious choice, right? Mm-hmm. So Florence, on the other hand, has a lot of pulls for somebody like you, both in your, and I'm mm-hmm. sure you come here, I know you come here all the time, but both in your, in both of your roles as a writer and as a professional tour guide. But why Livorno?
For Livorno, we have to thank and blame my now husband, who is Livornese. However, I didn't think I would live in Livorno. I was living in Rome when I met him. He was living in Livorno and working in Florence, also as a tour guide. So we were both going back and forth between Rome and Florence guiding. And I thought, I'm ready to get a little bit closer. I don't want to move in, it's too soon. I'm going to move to Florence. And, the Florence-Livorno commute is about an hour and a half. So that seemed like, better than Rome anyways. And I had my apartment ready. I was going to pick up the keys, getting all the garanzie for all the people to promise that they would pay if we didn't pay, just this on and on, this whole process, bureaucratic process. Yeah. And the day I was supposed to pick up my keys for my Florence apartment was the first day of the COVID lockdown.
Oh, no. Perfect timing, Lauren.
Exactly. As you probably remember, they announced the night before. So there was no warning about what would even happen with this because it was the first lockdown in the world after China. So I thought, okay, I'll just wait in Livorno here for a few more weeks, maybe a few months. As we all know. So after about a few months, the people kindly gave back the deposit. Thank you for that. And I thought, okay, we'll just see how this goes from here. And it's led to me staying in Livorno.
That's a nice pandemic outcome, because that must have felt really scary, I think, and it probably accelerated your relationship, and that is probably a good thing in the end, since you did. I mean,
it ended up working out.
It ended up working out.
It might have not gone that way.
But that was a very terrible time. And I can imagine that having, which, must have been it was a big decision for you, leaving Rome, which I'm sure you loved. How can you not?
It was so hard.
You were broken heart. You're leaving Rome. I'm going toward this thing. I'm not sure how it's going to work out. And then bam, the global pandemic.
Exactly. Yeah. It was really hard for me to leave Rome because I had lived there for 9 years at that point. That was the place that I fell in love with first in Italy, and that I'd become a guide first. So Rome feels like a home to me more than the U.S. does at this point. And I thought, okay, I'm getting my head around making Florence my new home, and the pandemic had other plans. But in the end, it allowed me to, fall in love more slowly with a place like Livorno, which at first is not like Rome and Florence. That's in your face with its, just over the top beauty and history and culture and art. And you're looking at all the most famous, artists of all time in these places. And Livorno is a kind of a slower, it's a slower place. The people are, as you said, just different. I haven't found people like them in Italy.
No.
And I've found as a foreigner there, just it's quite accepting. No one's asking, why are you here? Where are you from? When are you leaving? What are you studying? Like, they just assume you can't possibly be here to live.
Interesting.
In a place like Florence, and even in Rome, where there's so many people, foreigners coming in and moving out, and everyone kind of assumes you're a temporary person there. And in Livorno, they hear my accent. I don't think a single person has ever asked, that where are you from question, which I actually love. It's just like, I'm here, whatever. I have an accent. I'm clearly from somewhere else, and no one cares about it.
But that's a beautiful thing, and it speaks to that kind of, I think there's a particular kind of, it's kind of, I would call it just the down-to-earth quality that I think people from Livorno have. And also, it doesn't have tourists. It has a lot of people go in the summer because of the beaches. It's one of the nicest areas in Tuscany in terms of the beaches. But it doesn't get a lot of tourists. It doesn't get a lot of people who overwhelm it on the daily, which actually I think is kind of really nice.
Yeah, I've now found it, especially in my work as a tour guide, when I come into Florence, I'm in, of course, the most touristy spots. I'm in the museums, I'm in the main piazzas, and I'm with the tourists, and that's what my job is and what I like. But it is really nice to then leave all that behind, take the train through the countryside, and just be in a place where you can, stroll around, not in a crowd, not have to book in advance where you're going or make a big plan and deal with a million other people.
No, you can live a real life. I mean, you can actually live a real life. I'm really curious about you came here when you were quite young. You said, the original plan was a year. It was, a fairly typical study abroad love story. Mine is very similar. A lot of my guests have similar tales. I'm curious about your identity as a writer before you arrived in Italy and now that you've been living here for 15 years?
I think it's quite hard, for me to sort of differentiate these sort of times in my life because before I moved to Italy, I had always been in school. I had been in elementary school, high school, college. I graduated college in May, and I moved to Italy in August.
Wow.
So I didn't really have a identity outside of school in the U.S. ever. And I think my writing, as a young writer, I've always written. I mean, my whole life, I wrote my first short story completed. I wrote a lot of partially completed stories. And my first completed one, I remember very clearly, was at 10 years old, a total ripoff of the Polar Express, reimagined. But there it was. And I remember, thinking, oh, I'm just so behind. I have so many stories that I need to tell. But looking back on those stories now, of course, they're so influenced by everything else that I was reading at the time, like 10 years old, the Polar Express. And so I have sort of historical stories or stories about people coming back from the Vietnam War, which I don't know. I mean, come on, you're a high school student in California. You don't know anything about the Vietnam War. But I was just sort of writing in the context of other writers.
Okay.
Since coming to Italy, a big part of that is just growing up and having your own experiences and drawing on your own life experiences from that and putting that in your writing. So I don't think I can really differentiate my development as a writer from my move to Italy and my life here in the same way that you can't wherever you are growing up.
Yeah.
And growing up takes a lifetime, I would say.
Yeah.
There's not a period of growing up. You're constantly growing up and constantly learning and changing, and that's changing your writing too.
Exactly, and evolving as and also I think it's hard to reconcile sometimes the slowness of writing with the velocity of today's world, and that's something that I think is, though, comforting, like the fact that writing is still such a slow process and that it is something that requires that real slowing down. And I mean, unless you're obviously like, a journalist working under deadline, which I would not want to be in today's world because being a journalist sucks right now. But those of us who write, let's say, who do literary writing, do have that sort of the benefit of the slowness. I want to stay with short stories. I love them. I love reading them. I like the idea of writing them. I have written some. It's not something I really do a lot. You do have a published collection of short stories called Intermezzo. It's a bilingual edition. I also love those, by the way. Always have. Would you tell me more about Intermezzo? Also, maybe share with our non-Italian speaking listeners what Intermezzo means and tell us a little bit about the contents of that.
Yes. Intermezzo was something that came about also because of COVID and being forced to slow down way, way more than anyone ever thought they would have to do. I just sort of spent the time during COVID looking back on what I had produced, what I had written over the previous 10 years living in Italy. And realized that I had quite a few stories that I had always, that I sort of worked on and brought to completion, and then I set aside. And so I sort of took the time during COVID to put them together and see what could fit together. I added a few more stories. I wrote a few more for the collection. But Intermezzo is, this period in the middle. It's sort of a musical term in the middle of many pieces of music. As a kind of, and it can also kind of mean like a pause in the middle. And COVID was really a pause in the middle of my life. And all of the stories I was rereading represented a moment of transformation for a lot of characters. And it was not about what they would become, but they were just in this sort of intermezzo, pausa period in the center of a moment of change in their lives. And I think that moment of change is kind of it can be almost a magical, surreal moment because you are no longer the thing that you were. You're not yet the thing that you will become. And you're kind of this hybrid being. So many of the stories have a kind of surreal moment to them. They can be about characters falling in love, characters falling out of love. Some are about being a foreigner, not specifically necessarily in Italy, but some of them are set in Italy, not all of them. And so it felt like the right title at that time for my life and what each story kind of represented, moments of change.
I love that. And I also feel in a lot of ways that as foreigners living in Italy, we're always kind of in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. And you always feel like you're suspended, between these two worlds or two times or even two identities or more. Mm-hmm. And I love that. I think it's a beautiful way of expressing the idea of becoming, and the notions that we are all sort of works in progress, if you will. And I also love the idea of, multiple potential outcomes. And so that really resonates with me. How did you publish it? Can you tell us a little bit? Because I think a lot of people who are listening are writers and are always interested in the process. So when did when you finished it, or was it while you were writing or putting the stories together that you were like, you know what, I really want to get this thing out into the world?
I was very inspired by a good friend of mine who lives in Rome. She is also an author. Her name is Flavia Brunetti. And she and I had worked in Rome on a blog together in the days of blogs, getting invited to all sorts of, store openings and tours and all sorts of things to write about it on the blog, which was so fun. And we'd always, we were so similar in that we both were always writing and we were doing this blog thing, but what we really wanted was to work on our fiction. And at some point, Flavia just, she had a book, it was coming out, it was being published, and I was looking at her going, Flavia wrote a book. All of these other authors that I'm admiring are, of course, like the canon, like Margaret Atwood or whatever, so they just seemed so far away from me. And suddenly someone I knew whose writing I respect and love so much was publishing a book. And it just made me suddenly realize this is not something to do someday. This is something to do now. And I'd always had in my head, someday I'll do this, someday I'll do this. And she really inspired me to try to make it happen now instead of someday. And so I actually talked to her. Of course, I asked her, what did you do? How did this work? And she had gotten in touch with a very small independent publisher in Italy called Ali Ribelli Edizioni. And she said, why don't you write to them? Just see what they say. And so I spent months putting together the collection. I was writing more stories. I was putting together a way to present the stories. I wrote to them. We had a little bit of a back and forth, and they said, okay, we can publish it. And it was kind of like, okay, well, was that too easy? I mean, I don't know. I just expected them to say, that, there's no way, you're not ready. But, I finally realized that I was ready. And it was my idea to have the story in parallel text, which I found, I just thought, for me, that was very important to have. They said, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. We could just publish the English one. And but for me, having the parallel text on both pages facing each other is sort of the physical representation of the intermezzo. You are literally between two languages when you read this book, one on the right and one on the left, which might be challenging on a page flipping level, but okay. So I insisted that was very important for me. Also, for part of my identity, I speak Italian. I know Italian people that don't speak English. I speak English, obviously, and know English people that don't speak Italian. It just sort of felt like a representation of me in that moment. And they were very open to sort of working with me on it like a small press can do. Of course, people who publish with much larger presses have a lot less freedom. And for me, it was important to have that kind of freedom with a small publisher like this as my very first, published book coming out.
There's so many things I love about this story, and I often say, and I'm like a broken record here, but I'm someone who believes that proximity to writers helps you in ways that are just even too numerous to count. I mean, one I think is exactly what you said. That's that moment of epiphany where you're like, wait. This person I know, so not somebody abstract whose books I read and love, but somebody who actually I see every day or I have contact with or with whom I write has done this. I can do this too. So sort of I think we tend to, at least I, for such a long time, didn't have that kind of courage or belief in myself to say oh, I can actually do this, or I can, finish a book or try to publish a book or whatever. And then when you meet people and have that kind of closeness and they did it, and you say, well, you know what, I can probably do it too. Let me at least give it a try, right? And which brings me sort of to a question about community and a community of writers. You and I know each other, and I talk about them all the time on the podcast as well, but I will never, ever tire of plugging the Florence Literary Society. So here's another shout out. But I think community for writers is one of the most important things. I think when writers get together, I say this all the time, but something really magical happens. And I think it can feel very lonely, but when you have a community, all of a sudden you feel understood and seen. Can we talk a little about how you got involved? Can you tell us a little more about your role in the Florence Literary Society and the kind of wonderful things that you do with them, and also that the FLS just does?
Yes. This has been such a big and important project for me over the last few years. And I would take it back to my the Rome days with making writing groups in Rome. Because as a writer, you have to spend, of course, and you want to, if you're a writer, you have to really like doing it, but spend a lot of time by yourself reading other people's words. They don't talk back to you when you talk to them, and then writing. And having writing groups in Rome was completely transformative for my writing itself, sharing work with other people and getting their feedback and seeing oh, that person didn't get what I was saying and that person loved what I was saying. And how can I, blend these two things together? And taking criticism is so important as a writer, and being able to take it and morph it and work with it, and then just have people to go out with and understand what you are doing. Because I think the life of a writer is something that, a lot of people just don't get. Anyone who is a writer has that exact experience where they tell someone they write and they go, oh, okay. Or that's so great that you do that. Or just, you can just tell that they don't get at all what you're doing, and they're trying to be nice, but they're just like, why would you do that? And so to have other writers around where you don't have to explain why you're doing what you're doing, already that is a huge boost for you as a writer. And that helped me so much. And so when I thought, I'm going to come to Florence, I'm going to meet all these literary people, and then I found myself in Livorno. However, there are so many people in Florence that are interested in writing, and I found my way to many of them, partially through open doors, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I'm sure. But it all kind of coalesced with these incredible women, Lori Hetherington, Monica Sharp, and Libby Cataldi. And we had started out actually with yet another group of people making just a newsletter to go out to reach people. Because every time I talked with another writer, they were saying, I'm dying to meet other writers. I was like, okay, if we're all dying to meet each other, let's find a way to make this happen.
Yeah.
So it starts with the newsletter, just as what are the literary events so you can go to them and meet other writers there. And this kind of coalesced into creating, an official cultural association in Italy and all the bureaucracy that entails with these other women. And part of it was to bring back this publishing day, because if you're a writer, you maybe can learn all the craft and you can get all of the help from your other writer friends. And then you get to, how do I actually get my work out there and get seen and, be officially published and get an agent and, all of these technical details. So the sort of goal was to bring back Publishing Day, which was something that existed before COVID. And along the way, we also thought we could have some workshops. We could sponsor some people leading craft-based workshops. And the response has just been absolutely phenomenal in putting this thing together, and just seeing the excitement of people coming to join other writers. That's the entire purpose of this, because as you said, community is completely essential for any project. But I think for writing, when it can be something that's so lonely like that, it's you can't. There's nothing else that can replace a community.
No, and it's been a really important part of my life. Just my new life as a writer, and the people I've met are just extraordinary. It seems to be a magnet for just a really great group of human beings, and I think it's you and the entire team have just been incredible in the work that you do. And I would say it's almost like every month I'm like, what? Like, how many events are going on? Like, no, I can't. This is not possible, And it just shows how much of an interest there is in, creatives, meeting other creatives. I don't even want to limit it to writers, but, and also I love how many different kinds of people and different kinds of writers you meet from all over the world. It's just really cool. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I will never, ever tire of thanking you for bringing that, for making it happen.
Well, and writing can be something you know someone for years and you have no idea that they've written 3 novels, and they're because we've all had that experience of just you don't want to throw it out there to the wrong crowd. And so then once you're in a group that is meeting to write or to read or to talk about writing and reading, it's just bubbling up. There's an excitement inside all these people. And that's what's so fun to see come together and see what that then creates. Because together, new formations, new projects can emerge that would never have happened otherwise.
No, and I love that. And just the conversations, the people I've met, the brainstorming sessions I've attended. I mean, the way it has also helped me very, from a very practical point of view, to really look at my writing in a different way. And so again, Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's talk about Open Doors. You mentioned it briefly. It's a literary magazine. You seem to like challenges. It's like, I'm going to move during the pandemic. I'm going to start, a not-for-profit, association in Italy, which, by the way, is not for the faint-hearted. And then you're like, you know what? It's not enough. I'm going to also start a literary magazine, which in today's day and age feels like quite a bold move, Lauren.
Not a normal thing to do. I don't know what was going through.
What were you thinking?
What was I thinking? This is also the fault of COVID, I have to say. This sort of total transformative time in life that was so difficult, but led to so many incredible creative things. I don't know what I would be doing right now if I hadn't been forced to stop working as a guide. Obviously, there's no tourism during COVID. And just have the time to create, this book, that we talked about, but also Open Doors. So during COVID, all the lockdowns, you can't leave your house. Even if I could try to meet someone on a corner, I had been living in Livorno for a month before COVID. I didn't know anybody there. Wow. And then you also, as you know, were not allowed to even meet anyone. You couldn't be in a car with someone. It was extremely strict. And as we were going into the winter of 2020, it was like the lockdowns are coming back. Obviously, tourism season in the winter doesn't even happen anyways, for the most part. And, I was just sort of facing this many months of being, on lockdown at home. And I thought, I need to find a community of writers that are out there, and I need to find a magazine that will publish things. Where can I find this? In Italy, that is something available for Italian speakers and English speakers. And anything that was available was kind of on hold at that moment, of course, because everything was just ground to a halt. And so, with the crazed passion of someone who doesn't know what else to do with their time and is slowly going insane, I thought, you know what, I'll just make this. How difficult can this be? And who will be in it? The Rome writer friends that I have, there'll be maybe like 3 or 4 stories in it, whatever. Maybe I'll add some interviews to make it more interesting. So I was asking some friends, who could I interview? How will this work? Who wants to submit? I'll just start putting it online, see if anyone random also wants to submit. Okay, in the end of this, no one I knew almost submitted because everyone was, out of their minds with COVID
People
moment.
Were in survival mode.
Yeah, exactly. It was dealing with COVID in their own ways, obviously. And people from around the world were submitting stories and poems and essays and art to Open Doors. And writing things like, I'm so glad that I found this. I'm so glad that this exists. And I got to interview some amazing people through, friends of friends. Didn't realize I would be interviewing in Italian this incredible journalist, Eva Giovannini, who is just unbelievable, that I met through a friend. And, she had free time. So she was like, okay, sure. Let's do an interview. No problem. And so it just sort of took on a life of its own in a way. And through Open Doors is how I met people like Monica, who is one of the founders of Florence Literary Society and the huge influence in Open Doors. She is one of the main editors and just dedicates so much time and energy to making Open Doors possible as well. And people, it ended up being something that not only was a platform for people who write in English or in Italian, but also people reaching out saying, I want to be part of something like this. So, I just feel online, you go online and it's the end of literature and it's the end of attention spans and it's the end of creativity and the end of humanity. But on a daily life basis, I can just see through just this one I hate to do this, but through one open door, okay, of this magazine, it's like a magnet of people desperate for opportunities to connect and create together. So I think there's just not enough ways for people to do that.
Yeah.
I think people are dying for that.
They are.
and there's sort of that no one cares about anything anymore. Everyone's just a dry stick. I'm like, that's not true.
No.
That's just not true at all. And so it's been so heartening. It is so much work, to make this magazine happen twice a year. But every time I think, I have to reevaluate. I can only do so many projects at a time. I have my own writing. There's Florence Literary Society. There's guide work. There's Open Doors. And I can't give up Open Doors because it gives me so much energy and hope at this time.
Wow. That's a really beautiful thing to hear right now. And I honestly think that people are going to be looking more and more for that kind of a space. I think people are sick of social media. I think people are sick of the superficiality of our society. I think people are craving human connection. I think people feel alone. And I think that something that seems so archaic, and I'm putting air quotes here, it's an audio-only episode, but, people are craving something like that can really fill a void, that a real spiritual and cultural void that's happening right now. You mentioned that it comes out twice a year. We'll put, obviously, all the links in the show notes. But one thing that I love about it is you do these themes. And so could you just talk about when you did the last call for submissions, if you just give us a couple of what your favorite themes have been?
Yes, we just did our first themed issue that comes out in a couple days. And the theme for that one was insatiable appetites.
Yeah, I love that.
Which just sort of came to us and was like, that's it. I don't think there's another, we don't need to continue discussing this. There's a hunger for so many things in the world right now. And it just seemed like a theme that could be interpreted in a million different ways. That's what we really wanted. We were scared as well, what was going to come from this. But actually, it was amazing. The things that came in were quite amazing and less scary than some previous things. But in the past, what was happening without a theme was a theme would almost emerge from what people were sending in.
Nice.
So the second one ever was not a majority, but a huge portion of the submissions were about nature and returning to nature and the love of nature. And that's all connected as well to COVID. But it was really cool to see people submitting from, countries around the world feeling a similar theme at the same time.
Yeah.
So I almost didn't want to have a theme because I was really enjoying seeing what was percolating out there in the universe. But I'm glad we did this. We'll have another theme for the next one, which will be announced in a few days. So I'm excited to see what that brings as well.
Okay. So just this episode will come out in the late spring. So we will put maybe in the show notes what the theme is and how to submit and stuff.
Yeah, submissions will be open.
When will the deadline be for that?
The deadline for submissions will be June 20th.
Oh, okay. So we should be hopefully well in time. I didn't have this as one of my questions, but as you were speaking, I remembered that you do have a Substack. I didn't remember that you had a Substack, but you recently posted on your Substack a post about, and I love Italian idiomatic expressions, and you cite one of them, which is la fame o l'appetito viene mangiando, no? Which is just sort of this notion that Italians will always say, like, if you sit down to a meal and you're like, oh, I'm not really hungry, they're like, oh, but your appetite comes while you're eating. It's something that comes to you. And you recently did a post with that title, and I thought about it also with this with the theme of the Open Doors submissions this last cycle. And can you talk a little bit about your Substack and what everyone's on Substack? That's another thing I always say. It's like, why are you all on Substack?
Everyone is there. Everyone is there. It's the new place to be. For all the people who's writing now, literally everyone.
Yeah.
And they're all on Substack.
Yes.
So I started mine, last year a little bit. I'm doing it more regularly now. And currently it is, sort of a bunch of essay ideas that are kind of in my head, and they've been just sort of stuck there for a while. And I'm like, I need to get these out so I can move on, because I find once you write something, you process it, you think about it in a different way than you do when it's just in your head, and then you can kind of close the drawer.
Yeah.
And so I'm ready to close some drawers. I've got too much going on.
Too many open doors,
Yeah,
Lauren.
literally.
Too many open doors. Let's close some of those doors.
Windows, everything. And so in this latest one, I was sort of reflecting on the theme of insatiable appetites, and this concept of your appetite will come when you focus your attention on that thing. So, and I just find that so true for everything in my life. The more I read, the more I'm desperate to read more. The more I write, the more I want to write more. And it can go a bad way. The more you spend time on social media, the more you're suddenly on there the entire day. And so it's sort of a superpower that you can use, direct your attention in one direction for a little while, and that thing will flourish and grow. So be careful where you are putting your attention and where you're letting it be stolen from you. The attention economy, it's being stolen from you all the time. So you have to protect it and focus it. And part of writing this Substack is to focus my attention on regularly writing something that I don't make too precious, because what can really happen with writing is then you write the perfect short story and then you work on it for years, and it just, who cares? You got to get this stuff, in my opinion. It has to get out. It's healthier for it to get out, and it allows you to grow as a writer. If you're just working on the same thing forever, you can't grow so well.
I think perfection is a real enemy.
Yes.
This is something that I hate about myself. I have all these, along with self-doubt, I think the notion of perfection and the fact that we can only put things out there when they're perfect, whatever that means, I think is something that then just completely screws with your creativity and your whole attitude. I love the idea of, I want to ask you about your creative process, because it's something I've become a little obsessed with lately. I think there are so many demands on our time and our attention, and it is so easy to fall into, right, these traps. Time is different now. There's no two ways about it. Like, time is not what it was. Even, I would say, even just a couple of years ago. So what does your creative process look like in light of that?
I found, again, to go back, as I keep doing, I think there's this moment, lockdown was March of 2020. I think it's really in my head right now, because we're in March right now talking about this.
Yeah, me too. I've been thinking
it's just
about it
really
a lot.
close to my to the surface. But I had always written in, of course, you sort of, these ideas come up. I would find a moment to write them in a kind of all-out way. I'd spend a whole day working on something, and then I would have no more time after that, and I would just get distracted and lose the focus for weeks at a time, and then I'd come back. And I definitely still do that now. But something I started doing in COVID was to make a schedule for myself in the day. I would decide to write from a specific hour. I started with 1 hour, then it became 2, then 3, and then it became 4 hours every morning. And I found it was a completely different way of thinking and producing things. I would have the active writing time in the morning, and the whole rest of the day I was thinking about the writing. And then I would come back to it at that time. I didn't allow myself to write for the rest of the day. I could make notes, I could do research, but I basically wouldn't actually do the writing of the story that I was working on. And I found, I wrote a 100,000 word novel in that time, in the first COVID lockdown, which is now, a crazy novel that needs so much work that I'm still working on now. But it was something I keep trying to recreate in patches of time. If I decide I have to write a certain amount every single day, I will quickly fail, and then I will feel bad about it.
Okay.
If I decide, okay, this week, these are the patches of time I have to write, those will be the times that I write. And then if I have a moment on the train, or I have an idea of a sentence, I jot it down, but I kind of preserve those islands of writing time in which the phone is off, a timer is on, and I know that in that period I will be writing or just sitting there staring out the window. Nothing else is allowed.
I really enjoy hearing about other people's creative processes because I think it is helpful. I think too many times we hear things and we think, oh, that's what I should be doing, or I shouldn't be doing that. And it's really important that we find our own rituals that are the ones that work the best for us, also in terms of our lives, which brings me perfectly to my next question. You kind of casually mentioned that you're a tour guide. And I want to talk about that because that is also storytelling. And I'd love to know how those your dual identities dialogue with each other and how I would imagine they also inspire each other. First of all, you get to meet a lot of, I'm sure, crazy characters, which, always helpful in life.
Absolutely.
Be careful if you're friends with writers because you will end up in a book or a short story. But also, I think because you get to see so much beauty every day, having that close contact with so much beauty is always inspiring. So I'm just curious how your dual identities feed off of each other.
Yes, I think I would not be the writer that I am now if I had not started working as a guide. I started guiding in 2013 in Rome, and first on a storytelling level, you learn so quickly how to tell a better story. Which was something that was missing from my writing. It took me a long time to put what I'd learned from guiding into my writing. I didn't realize that they were connected somehow until it was suddenly so blindingly obvious that they were. But, you have these people right in front of you. They're looking at you. You're talking. And you can see them starting to look off in another direction or talk to each other or read the plaque. Oh, the worst. If you're on a tour, only do that if you hate the guide and want to punish them somehow. And at first, I thought a tour guide gave people information. No. Poor people that I met in 2013. I'm sorry for subjecting you to just tons of random facts and how the entire Roman Republic went together and all this stuff. Oh, gosh. I realized eventually that it is about telling a story. You have to, you have a hook at the beginning. You have a question at the beginning. Why did this happen? You see you see their faces. Their reactions are in real time right in front of you, wondering, I want to know that. You ask them to interact with what's around them based on what they are giving back to you. Oh, this person seems more interested in architecture. Let's talk about that. Oh, they're more interested in daily life. Let's talk about that. You're constantly adapting in a way to find the best way to tell the story to that person. And I was finding in my writing, I was doing lots of beautiful descriptions and cool dialogue and a cool character, but I wasn't capturing people quickly because I hadn't really put those two things together yet.
Yeah.
So just on a storytelling level, guiding completely changed the way that I think about writing. You got to have a cool conclusion.
Yeah.
You can't just peter out into, well, that was nice. There has to be a wow factor at the end of a story. And the story can be 2 minutes long. It can also last the entire tour. If you have one overarching story that lasts for 4 hours and then a bunch of little stories in between, that's a book, and those are a bunch of chapters. And then, of course, there's nothing more inspiring than basically talking about, Western civilization, the greatest artists of all time, why things happened the way that they happened in history. You're sort of constantly inspired by the subject matter and, like you said, by all the people that you meet.
Yeah.
Because everyone is similar in many ways. You start getting the joke that always gets a laugh until suddenly it doesn't. And then you're like, what's with you? What's going to make you laugh? Now I have a challenge. People are changing. Their attention span is definitely changing, I would say. But ultimately, people are still hungry for the stories about a place that make it come to life.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what you said is so 100% accurate. Like the way you tell the story, how that became clear to you also as a writer, actually you're very lucky because, There's something crazily large flying around in the studio. It's like a large insect, but that's okay. See, it's a surprise. It's a zinger in the story that we were not. Oh, God.
Eccola. See.
Okay, that's okay. We're almost done. Last question. Okay, so you just dropped that you wrote 100,000-word novel. You said it needs a lot of work. My last question is always the same one, but what's next for you, Lauren? That doesn't mean you have to give any spoilers for your novel, but I'm just curious what, in addition to everything you're doing, which is a million different things, what is up next?
I am still working on that novel. I put it aside for a few years because I was just completely stuck with how to make it function because it was all over the place, of course, because I wrote it in 2 months during COVID, so I was out of my mind at the time. But the core was there. The basics were there. I've been working on it for the last 2 years as part of a master's program that I'm doing online with the University of Lancaster in the UK, which has been an incredible program. I've been paired with a wonderful tutor who's helped me so much with my writing, and that will conclude this summer, and hopefully I will have a first draft of the book this summer. That is my goal.
That sounds amazing. Is that an MFA program?
Yeah, an MA program.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah. Well, we can't wait to see what happens next. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today, for being patient with the insect flying around that I don't know where it went off to now.
It's and so waiting to attack.
I'm like, okay, this was a plot twist that we had not anticipated. It's kind of Kafkaesque,
Exactly. Transformation.
Exactly.
Spring.
Yes, it's all about transformation and evolution. I have loved chatting with you. I don't know why. I'm so glad we did this because we see each other all the time. We never have a chance to really talk because we're always like in the midst of social events or, you know, writing stuff. So this has been a joy to get to know you a little better and to share your story with our listeners. Thank you, Lauren.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that I could come and we could chat more.
Grazie.